Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros. It's Drew here, and today we're officially starting Listmas 2023, counting down my top 10 vertical loops on roller coasters. That's right, on the first day of Listmas 2023, you're getting my top 10 vertical loops on roller coasters, just like the one that's on my cool holiday shirt. Let me know if you'd ever want one of these. However, I think it's a little too late in the season to order it for the holidays itself, but I do have other Parks Bros t-shirts at parksbrosapparel.com, so make sure to check it out. But I mentioned my shirt, I mentioned the logo that's on the shirt because it features a vertical loop. Arguably the most iconic element on roller coasters. It's commonly referred to as a loop-de-loop by people that aren't coaster enthusiasts, and it really was the start of the coaster revolution. Now, the loop that my logo is based off of sadly won't be featured in this video as the ride did not operate this year, and of course that's Montezuma's Revenge. In just a couple of months' time, that ride will have officially closed 2 years ago, which is just insane to think about. But I assure you, if it was still operating today, this would probably be in my number 3 or number 2 spot. It was one of the best moments on any coaster out there. But let's finally dive in with the top 10. Coming in at number 10 was realistically the first modern loop to start it all, and that's the loop on the New Revolution at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This opened just a couple of weeks before Corkscrew at Cedar Point and officially gained the title of the ride with the first modern vertical loop on a coaster. It was made by the same folks who made Montezuma's Revenge, Schwarzkopf, and this ride just keeps building toward this crazy climax of going upside down, which was literally a revolution at that point. It was famously featured in Vacation, and it's one of the most iconic moments on a coaster in the world. I will say it has not aged necessarily the best. It can be a little shaky, but it does pull off some crazy positive G's. Going from the first to a record holder in its own right, we're heading at number 9 to Superman Krypton Coaster at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas for its stunning vertical loop. Now, this vertical loop might not be that different compared to a lot of the other ones we'll mention on this list that are made by B&M. However, this one's noticeable, especially because it was a record holder as the tallest loop in the world for a time, and it's also right next to that quarry wall, so it gives a very stunning view with Superman standing right on top, which I think is a cool add-on. This loop is massive, however, because you're right next to the quarry wall, it does feel a little shorter than you might expect, but it is easily one of the best moments on this coaster, and of course, one of the best vertical loops I've ever experienced. We're going to be sticking with the B&M hype train for the next one as we head to a bunch of parks throughout the US and the world, as we're going to talk about Batman the Ride clones by B&M. Now, these rides feature 2 different vertical loops, so you might be wondering which one I'm talking about. I'm actually going to be talking about the second vertical loop. After a first steep drop, you head into a vertical loop before a 0G roll, and then eventually that second vertical loop. Because of all the inversions prior, your body's already going through some weird changes, and it doesn't exactly know how to handle another inversion, let alone one that's incredibly powerful. So this is when you really feel that gray out, where your vision kind of blurs a little bit as you're pulling more and more positive G's. The blood really just rushes to your feet, unlike any other loop out there. Well, except for some of the ones I'm going to bring up in just a second. The B&M hype train keeps rolling on as we go to number 7, right next to Batman at Magic Mountain, Riddler's Revenge. This stand-up roller coaster, after its first amazing drop, has a vertical loop over and under the lift hill, and because of its stand-up nature, you get this weird weightless feeling that you don't really get on anything else. If your feet are naturally touching the ground, it truly feels like you're heading to space. It's such a cool moment, as long as your seating position is comfortable. Next up is a vertical loop that I feel isn't talked about enough, and it's one that I've been liking more and more the more I ride this ride, and it's Silver Bullet's first vertical loop from Knott's Berry Farm. Now, this ride has gotten flack by myself and many others throughout the years. However, I have found myself liking it more and more as the years go on. Sure, the first drop isn't really a drop, but as this ride goes on, it just keeps getting better and better, and it starts off really with its first bang being that vertical loop. Now, I'm not entirely sure how these forces work out, but maybe because the drop is so shallow, the regular change for the B&M loop is steeper than it normally would be. But for some reason, I find myself graying out at this moment more than the finale helix, especially if you're riding towards the front row. There's just a crazy angle change flipping you all the way backwards. It's also a great precursor to the rest of the layout, as right before you head into that overbank turn, your vision might be blurry enough where it just feels even more disorienting. It's a great moment, don't get me wrong, as we head to our number 5 on the list. Staying in California, going up to Six Flags Magic Mountain now, we're going to their classic aero coaster built in 1990, Viper. Now, this ride is actually one of few that features 3 vertical loops, and almost all directly in a row. This ridiculously steep, nearly 200-foot tall drop brings you all the way to the ground before going up to what once was the highest vertical loop in the world, before taking a sharp left turn and greeting yourself with another 2 vertical loops in a row. Now, all 3 of these experiences are ridiculously intense and can make you gray out pretty easily, as well as shake you around a little bit. However, it's really that first vertical loop that feels unlike any other out there, as you have a ridiculous amount of speed following a very, very steep and giant drop. Now, because these elements are kind of cookie cutter and typically the same size, if not the same shape almost exactly, instead of just making one big loop at the time, they just made the same size loop high up. So you experience something else like Silver Bullet's first loop, where there's just a crazy angle change out of nowhere, and even some trims, so if you're going too fast, your train will slow down just a tiny bit, giving you a little bit of hang time up at the very top after and before you get some crazy positive G's. This is really just nuts, and it doesn't make sense to my modern engineering brain, but man, does it make for a memorable moment, and it's easily one of my favorite moments on Viper. Next up at number 4, we're going to head all the way to Florida for the incredible Hulk coaster at Islands of Adventure at the Universal Orlando Resort. This is another B&M ride, however, this time you're sitting down properly. You're not underneath the track, you're not standing up. However, it does feature a launch to get the ride going. This launch leads you directly into a 0G roll and then a Cobra roll. Following the Cobra roll, you've got one of the biggest loops out there that leads directly into a tunnel. Now, I will say, the loop itself isn't necessarily the best element. It really is pushed upward by the elements surrounding it, especially that Cobra roll just before. The Cobra roll is so forceful that I find myself graying out and nearly blacking out sometimes before directly heading into this next forceful element. This loop is something that I feel like I barely remember a lot of the time because of that graying out nature, but man, it just makes it so much better, especially after feeling that and then diving into a dark tunnel with some mist. You also have that soundtrack blaring in your eardrums, and it just makes everything so much better. I love this loop. I love this ride. Man, I need to get back out to Florida and ride the Incredible Hulk coaster yet again. Now, into our top 3, I've kind of split this between 2 separate rides that I've been able to take on. However, they feature almost identical loops because these are copy-paste layouts. Both made by Schwarzkopf. This is Colossus the Fire Dragon at Lagoon and Scorpion at Busch Gardens, Tampa. Now, they're not exactly the same layout, however, they're made by the same people and they're both cloned layouts of realistically the same ride. However, Colossus the Fire Dragon features 2 vertical loops in a row right after its first drop, whereas Scorpion features just the lone one. These loops, however, feel almost completely identical as they pull almost 5 Gs multiple times throughout, just going upside down, as well as a little bit of amazing hang time. These loops are just incredible, and they do feature some of the most iconic sounds you've ever heard on a coaster. The roar of those loops especially just ring in your ears for a lifetime. It is incredible. But because they're nearly circular, just like the Montezuma's Revenge loop, I mean, they realistically are the same, except you don't go backwards through them. They pull some amazing Gs in in, out, and in the middle, you get a little bit of that blissful airtime with a pretty minimal restraint. I also find myself graying out on these loops quite often because of that nearly 5G pull that it does multiple times, and they're a dying breed at this point, so make sure you check them out as quick as you can. Number 2, we're going to head to Missouri, specifically Branson, Missouri, for Silver Dollar City's own Time Traveler with its 95-foot tall loop. Time Traveler, if you did not know, is a mock extreme spinning coaster, meaning that it is a launch coaster and a spinning coaster at the same time, creating a really crazy experience. Oh, and did I forget to mention, it also has inversions. Now, this 95-foot tall loop was kind of memed on when the announcement was had because of the announcer's voice saying it. However, the hype is there. It's not my favorite inversion on the ride necessarily. However, in terms of vertical loops, it is really impressive. You rotating freely while going upside down in a semicircular loop is just really amazing. You can enter it sideways, backwards, forwards, diagonal, or heck, there was even a couple of rides where I was continually spinning throughout it. It is really disorienting, but in the best way. It also is completely surrounded by track. You go in, out, and under. It's just incredible visually. Now, forces-wise, it's not the most powerful. However, those visuals and the spinning aspect really vault this up really high in my rankings. All right, number 1, I don't think this is much of a surprise to anybody, but it's still the largest vertical loop in North America and was for the world for a time. This is Full Throttle's vertical loop. Full Throttle was made by Premier Rides in 2013 and premiered at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. This thing is nuts. You start out with a 70-mile-an-hour launch before getting vaulted up into a 160-foot tall loop. Now, in terms of positive forces, there aren't too many, but this is where it excels. It's the negative forces. You get an insane amount of hang time, and what I mean by that is pretty much feeling like you're floating out of your seat while upside down. It's really remarkable, and it's easily one of the best moments on a coaster out there, especially considering you're up there for a good 3 seconds or so before coming right back down to the ground. Now, this loop gets bonus points too, because later in the ride, you actually ride on a piece of track that is connected over top of it, gaining an 80-degree drop to finish off the ride. But yeah, Full Throttle, I think, takes the sweep in terms of best vertical loop that I've ever experienced. Well, there you have it. Day 1 of Listmas is officially over. Well, I guess I should say just for this video, as my top 10 night rides is going to come out in just a couple of hours from when this video first drops. So make sure to check out day 2 very, very soon. And make sure to subscribe if you haven't, because we're going to have 12 full days of Listmas all the way till the 25th, when I'll be going through my top 50 roller coasters I've ever experienced. So I hope you're excited to see more lists and a couple of guest stars as well. But of course, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, we'll see you on the next ride.